The makeup of Minnesota's residents is changing rapidly. We're becoming older and more racially and ethnically diverse. By 2020, Minnesota will have more adults over the age of 65 than school-aged children for the first time in our state's history. In 1980, when I moved to Minnesota, people of color and American Indians made up about 2% of Minnesota's population. Today, there are over 19% of our population, numbering over 1 million individuals. And that growth is projected to continue far into the future. The state of Minnesota is the largest employer in the state, employing around 40,000 people. In addition, the state of Minnesota provides and oversees services and policies that impact everyone in the state. That means that the hiring and retention of state employees has a major impact on Minnesota from border to border. Ideally, the workforce in state government should reflect Minnesota's population. Unfortunately, people of color and American Indians are underrepresented in most state agencies. But that is changing due to some concentrated and targeted efforts to increase diversity through modifications in hiring and retention policies and practices. On today's episode of A Public Health Journal, we're going to talk about why having a diverse government workforce is important and what's being done to make that happen. Please stay tuned.
Welcome to A Public Health Journal, a program that explores the public health issues facing our society today and tomorrow. The host of our show is Dr. Ed Ellinger, Commissioner of Health for the state of Minnesota. A Public Health Journal is sponsored by the Minnesota Department of Health, the Hennepin County Human Services and Public Health Department, and the Minnesota Public Health Association, all working together towards the goal of healthy people living and thriving in healthy communities.
Welcome to A Public Health Journal. The increasing diversity of our society is already having a huge impact on Minnesota, and those impacts will only increase over the coming decades. They are requiring us to learn some new cross-cultural skills and forcing organizations to look at how they will have to change to be able to meet the needs of a more diverse population. As the state's largest employer, it's important that the state of Minnesota is at the forefront of those changes because it impacts the health and well-being of everyone in the state. And a great deal is going on to attract and retain a highly qualified and diverse workforce in state government agencies to best meet the needs of all Minnesota residents. To talk about some of those efforts, I've invited James Burroughs to join me. Mr. Burroughs is the Chief Inclusion Officer for the state of Minnesota, which has the responsibility to increase diversity in the workforce, improve state contracting, bridge racial disparities, and expand outreach to communities of color. James, welcome to our program.
Thank you, Ed. Thanks for having me.
You have a big job from that introduction.
It does. When you said it, it just made me think about, man, I took this on. Why? But I do have a big job, but it's going very well and I love it. So.
All right, so that is the question. You took on this job, why? Why is it so important for the state to have, the state of Minnesota as an employer, to really focus on diversity and inclusion?
It's very important for a couple of reasons. One is the state's demographic has changed tremendously. I came here in 1992, and in 1992, I want to say the people of color population in the state of Minnesota was about 5%. In particular, I know the African-American number was 3% because I came from DC, Atlanta, and Detroit where it was a much larger number. So before I came here, I looked at that number and I said, okay, I'm coming to a place where I'll be in the super minority as opposed to the majority where I was before. Since then, it's about 20% people of color now in the state of Minnesota, and we want a workforce in the state of Minnesota that reflects our diversity. So right now we have about 20% people of color, about 10% people with disabilities in the state, so we want our workforce to reflect that. And more importantly too, our economy, if we don't increase the number of people in the workforce, we'll have about 100,000, 120,000 job shortage in the state of Minnesota. So in addition to wanting a more diverse workforce that reflects the state demography, we also want a workforce that basically can keep our employers running and keep our economy strong. So that's why it's important. And I think the last thing is too, everybody needs to feel a part of all Minnesotans being successful. Too many times we have charts that show Minnesota as a great state to work in, a great place to do business, but those disparities, those racial disparities also show us that we're not doing a great job in certain areas, so that's what we want to improve upon, and that's my job.
Mm-hmm. So does, certainly there's a numbers issue, as you mentioned. We need enough people in the workforce, and so you try to make sure that you tap it from whatever source you can. But then there's just the diversity of the workforce, even if independent of the numbers. Is governmental agencies more effective when they better reflect the population that they serve?
Absolutely. So imagine this. Let's say that you were creating a solution for a issue concerning gender, so women. So it's an issue concerning women and they needed a great solution. Would you want to have a team of all men of one particular race just determine that solution. So in years past, in state government, other places, we've had that. A gender balance that wasn't as balanced as we have now. So right now we have 50% women, 50% men in our workforce. I think we create better solutions when we have that diversity. In addition to that, as I said before, our numbers have increased tremendously. We're 20% people of color now in the state. If we want to create solutions around our Department of Human Services, around our health department to end some of these racial disparities, isn't it best to have people at the table who could give us an equity lens, who could give us a lens of a racial diversity lens, who could give us a lens of, hey, this is how I want my communities to be served, or this is how I want you to communicate with my communities. So that's the best thing as far as doing good business. So the business case for this is real simple. We provide services for all Minnesotans, and if we don't provide services for Minnesotans who've been typically underrepresented or they haven't had the quality of service they need to, we need them at the table. I think that's why civic engagement is so important, but also too, how we plan for the future is important as well.
Now you're the Chief Inclusion Officer. What's the difference between inclusion and diversity? How do those fit together?
Good question. The office was intentionally named before I got here by Governor Dayton, Lieutenant Governor Smith, and Jamie Tinch, our Chief of Staff. So inclusion, I'll look at it this way. So diversity is counting people, and inclusion is making people count. And the making people count piece is, how do you feel when you go to work or come to state as an employer? Are you feeling valued? Can you bring your full self to work? Are you able to give and share ideas in a way that's genuinely you, or do you have to fit into a particular culture or environment? Inclusion is the most important piece out of the diversity. For me, diversity is easy. It's basically identifying different communities and recruiting in those communities, and then say, hey, come over here and work. And people want jobs. Our unemployment rate is higher in communities of color, so we should be able to find people to come and offer them jobs. That's the easier piece. The harder piece is, how do we retain those employees? How do we make them feel valued, included, and that their opinion counts? How do we make sure that they have leadership opportunities? How do we diversify our commissioner level? How do we make sure that we have more diversity amongst commissioners, deputy commissioners, assistant commissioners? How do we have long-term success and grow our employees that if you come to work here in the state of Minnesota, 5 years from now, you're not in the same position, but you've been able to move up in the workplace as well. So inclusion, in short, is feeling valued and bringing that value and that full self to work, and making sure that when you get up in the morning, you come to work, and when you leave work, you're saying, man, I love working at that place. They hear me, they respect my community, and I really want to be there.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting that you bring that up. We're just putting out our statewide health assessment, and we have a section called belonging, that if you actually feel like you belong in the state, you're valued in the state, you'll be healthier, because health is all about relationships. And it sounds like you're developing, the inclusion is, how do you develop the relationships within an organization that makes you feel like you belong to that organization?
Absolutely. I mean, it's funny that you mention that, because I would imagine that stress and or things related to stress have to do with your health and condition. So imagine you're coming to a place where you don't really want to be there. You're stressed out about being there. You're basically cautious about what you say and who you say it to. I can imagine that would drive up your blood pressure, among other negative health impacts. So I'm glad that you're all looking at that. That's something, I think people need to consider. It's not just about employment, it's about the full gamut of your whole self, and your health is impacted by that as well.
Now, you talked about diversity, and there are lots of diversity. Certainly people of color and American Indians, but you have GLBT, you have disabled, you have veterans, you have rural, urban.
Yes.
Are those all part of your portfolio?
They are. Each of the ones we focus on the most, I'll be quite candid, are people of color and American Indian, and also disability. Those two have executive orders that the governor has put in place in 2015. So we have a percentage goal of getting to 7% people with disabilities. We're at around between 6.2% and 6.6% now. And that goal is by August of 2018. We're going to increase that goal to 10%. We're not going to change the executive order, but in my mind is a stretch goal, getting 10%. The other primary focus is people of color and American Indian. Right now we're at about 11.9%. We want to get to 20% by the time the governor leaves office in January 2019. We also are focused on LGBTQ population. We're also focused on veterans and also the diversity of rural as far as urban. LGBTQ, we're in the beginning stages of building the foundation there. There hasn't been really a focus in the state prior to me getting here about even identifying who is LGBTQ, and we're not going to ask that question. We're going to create ERGs and other employee resource groups so people feel valued coming, and how do we recruit from that particular community. Veterans as well. Our Veteran Affairs Department does a great job in diversity, so does our National Guard through General Nash. We want to make sure that we're being more inclusive in that area. So those are things we're focused on as well, but I'll be honest, my main focus so far has been people of color, American Indian, and also people with disabilities as well.
Great. Well, I want to get into some of the data. You mentioned a little bit of it in the next segment to see how the state is doing, but first we need to take a little break.
Sure.
We'll be back right after this message. Welcome back. We're talking about diversity and inclusion in state government with James Burroughs, the Chief Inclusion Officer for the state of Minnesota. James, you had started talking about, how Minnesota is doing, the things that we're focusing on, and we've got a series of slides here that you provided for us that sort of gives an idea of where we are. And so let's start talking about, the total staff that we have in the first slide that we have by protected group status. What do you mean by protected group status, first of all?
Sure. So protected group status is a legal definition, and it includes people that have been traditionally underrepresented or traditionally discriminated against. So it includes Black, Latino, Asian, Hawaiian Islander, Pacific Islander as well, in addition to American Indian, as well as persons with disabilities. So those are protected classes. Veterans would also fall in there. So those are protected by law in Minnesota and also federally. Those we measure to make sure that diversity is represented. But it's not just based upon race. We also look at gender as well. We also look at LGBTQ status, which is a protected class as well in the state of Minnesota. So that's the definition of protected class.
So let's look at the bar chart that we've got that says total staff by protected group status. It has racial and ethnic minorities, people with disabilities, veterans, and female employees. Explain what's going on.
Sure. If you look at the chart here, you look at where we were in the first quarter of 2016. Racial and ethnic minorities were at 9%, so we have about a 2.9% increase. And that's through our efforts of making sure that we've been intentional in recruiting not only people from all aspects in our state government. We focus particularly on our top 1,000 leaders in state government. We want to diversify that workforce. So within that number, we have about 202 executives that we've recruited since 2015, into 2015 to now. And that clip, we've basically we're basically recruiting at about 22% of those have been people of color, 8.4% have been people with disabilities. So that number has been able to increase. The second number you have there is employees with disabilities. That number has increased, not as dramatically, but it's increased from where it was before, 6% to 6.6%. Now, I will be candid with you, we're still recalculating that number. It's in between 6.2 and 6.6. I'm not a math major, but I saw something that I want to bring my attention to. So it is in the 6% range, but we have been improved upon that as well. More importantly in that area, not only have the numbers gone up, but the awareness of how to interact and work with people with disabilities has been important. We'll talk a little bit later about retention. We have a lot of people with disabilities, but sometimes they don't feel comfortable bringing their full self to work because people don't know how to make them feel in an inclusive environment. So we've done a better job on doing that as well. The last number there, as far as veterans, you can see it's gone down a little bit. That what we got to look at. I don't think the number of veterans have gone down, but how veterans have reported and how veterans sometimes have gone back into service have counted against it. So if we lose veterans who go back into service or re-enlist or re-enroll in full-time service, that number will go down. But we haven't seen a tick of veterans who have left state government for different reasons. So we have to improve upon that number, but that's the reason it's gone down.
And I know a lot of these things are self-reported, so that it's how people report it is really important.
Exactly.
All right, so the next slide actually is a little bit more proactive. All right, you've got, this is the status where we are at this point in time, and now we're looking at hiring rate by protected. That means, all right, who are you bringing on board? And, and it looks like we're making some really significant progress. We
are. As you can see, racial ethnic minorities, our hiring rate is up to 18.8%. So essentially, those folks that we're bringing in from 2015 on forward, That's been our hiring rate. In order to get to 20%, we had to increase our hiring rate. For executives, like I said in the before, it's at 22.4%. So executive level is even higher than that. Same with employees with disabilities. Our hiring rate, as you see there, is 5.8%, up from 4.2. But also to an executive level, it's up to 8.4% now. Veterans, as you see there before, as I said before, those numbers we need to look at as far as the self-reporting and why veterans are choosing to go back. Well, it's a good thing, back full-time into the military, but how that impacts our hiring rate. And then also with female employees, it stayed about the same. We have basically a 50-50 split on gender diversity. We got to do better, though, in leadership positions in gender diversity. Right now, that's across the board, that 50% number, but in leadership positions, it's much lower than that 50%.
Yeah. All right, and then the third slide that we have really looks at the turnover, and that's where you really kind of talk about the inclusion, that people feel belonging to an organization, that they feel valued, that they can bring their whole self to work. And this shows, you know, what by turnover by those protected groups, meaning the people who've been on board and then leave. So what are we seeing there?
So what we're seeing there is a good thing. As far as racial ethnic employees and also employees with disabilities, that attrition rate has gone down. So we were losing people at a clip of 10.3% racial and ethnic minorities. That's down to 6.8%. When I first got to the state, I spent 4 months just interviewing and talking to people about why do you leave state government or why would you want to stay? And a lot of them said the same thing. People with disabilities and racial ethnic minorities said they weren't getting the opportunity to get promoted into jobs in leadership. They weren't getting promoted to being an assistant commissioner, a deputy commissioner, one day being possibly a commissioner. So what we said was we need to look at that and identify tracks for that to happen. So we're going to create something out of this real soon this year. It's going to be called the Roy Wilkins Leadership Academy, and essentially it will be named after Roy Wilkins, who's a native of St. Paul, Minnesota, former national NAACP chair in the 1920s, and someone who went to the University of Minnesota. We want to make sure that folks who are in those particular categories get the leadership development and training. So it'll be a 6 to 9 month leadership development training program. While you're in the program, you'll get mentored by folks like you, commissioners and deputy commissioners. You'll also get mentored by outside folks who are CEOs and leadership in private sector. And when you're finished, we put you on a track to get into those leadership positions in state government. The trick to it is, too, if you don't get opportunities in state government, intentionally bringing on private sector folks, they're going to see the talent, skills, and abilities of these people as well, so they may be able to pluck them from state government. Now, my boss, the governor, is not going to be too happy with that, but I want to keep people in the region and get them developed, so that's something we're going to look at that attrition rate to get it down as well. So we're doing a lot better in that area, and that's the key, because like I said before, you can recruit as many people as you want, but if they're going out the back door and you're not giving them room to develop and be included in basically the workforce, is something that we really want to focus on.
How is the state of Minnesota doing relative to the private sector? And how are we doing relative to state government in other states? Do you know?
Sure, I do. We, the University of Minnesota commissioned a study for us. Their Carlson School of Management did a study of looking at us amongst other states. Amongst persons with disabilities, we're actually at the top. We have one of the highest rates of persons with disabilities in state government, and also our retention rate is a lot better than other states as well. People of color, we're kind of like in the midpoint. There are other states that are doing better than us. Now, they do have more people of color within that state, but also, too, they're doing better as far as retaining people and also promoting them as well. So we're like, out of 50 states, we're in the midpoint of there. Private sector, I'd say we're holding our own. Some private sectors have more people in leadership positions than we do, because this effort intentionally wasn't started until like 2014, 2015 by the governor's executive order. So we have some catch up to do. But I would say this, we're now competing with the private sector as far as getting top quality employees. So some of the new hires we've had, our director of recruiting and retention, Tracy Gibson, came to us after serving at Cargill for many years. We have another director of HR who works for you, Kathy Allen Madison, who came to us from Children's Hospital after many years. So we're competing with some of the top employers and getting good talent, because folks now know about, man, I can come to the state and have a great opportunity. So our marketing, our brand has improved tremendously, and now we're competing against the General Mills, the Cargills of the world. And I sit on a chief diversity officer kind of quasi-council of like 6 or 7 of us who meet on a regular basis to talk about things we can do collectively to increase regional recruiting, not just about the state or private employers. Yeah.
Well, we're going to talk a little bit about how you've been able to make some of these changes in the next segment, but first we need to take another little break. We'll be back right after this message. Welcome back. We're talking about diversity and inclusion in the state government with James Burroughs, the Chief Inclusion Officer for the state of Minnesota. James, before we get to the project, I know you're really proud of your daughter because I see pictures of her and this little video that we just showed, you know, an African-American dad and it looked like his son. Are you doing some of this for the kids that come up after?
Absolutely. So you're right. I am proud of Teresa Ann Burroughs, and say hi, Teresa, if you watch the show. One of the things that we have to do is do this for our young people. My daughter also suffers from one of the health disparities that you talk about on your show, sickle cell. And she's a spokesperson for the Memorial Blood Center and sickle cell, identifying racial disparities. We identify racial disparities around health, employment, and also how we spend our money. We have to make it a better place in Minnesota for the next generation, because if we don't, we're not going to be competitive. We're going to be in a place where my daughter will go to college, and hopefully she goes to college here, but if not, I want her to come back to Minnesota and live a vibrant life. But if she sees that these disparities continue, she's going to move other places. She's not going to even consider Minnesota, and Minnesota will lose out on some great talent, skills, and abilities of our young people. So part of the reason I do this is making sure that our young people have that opportunity. And speaking of that, I mean, one of the things we're doing to go off in the future is create internship opportunities for our high school students, our college students, underrepresented groups, and making sure they have opportunities. So we have the Urban Scholars Program, where we look at college students who are students of color. We had about 16 interns last year. I challenged you and the other commissioners to get it to 32. We almost got it. We went to 28. And these students are basically juniors and seniors and sophomores who are coming to work for the state as interns. We also have our Right Step program, which is our St. Paul program for high school students. And we have our Step Up program, is the equivalent in Minneapolis for Achieve Minneapolis, to bring in high school students over the summer. They do paid internships. So to your point about the next generation, we're making sure that we include them. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention our Star of the North program, which takes fellows who are in graduate school and brings them for employment over the summer as well. So creating that pipeline is one of the things we are trying to do to kind of create more opportunities for success.
Right. You know, and that will certainly lead to the number of people coming on board. But as you mentioned, the inclusion piece, the retention piece is really important. What are you doing to actually retain, you know, these highly qualified individuals who come from diverse backgrounds?
We're doing a couple of things. So one is, I mentioned before, the Roy Wilkins program that we're going to start up, but more importantly, working closely with the commissioners and leaders. So as you know, I'm part of the governor's senior leadership team, and that makes me part of the cabinet as well, with all of our 24 executive cabinet member commissioner leaders. And working with you all individually to say, okay, now that you have a leadership team that's more diverse, how do we give you the skills necessary to manage and lead diverse teams? So one of the things we're doing is we've identified 2 or 3 top vendors on diversity and inclusion who are going to be working with the different agencies around inclusion strategies around retention. So how do you develop employees that you brought on and recruited and retain them in different areas? So basically coaching around equity, coaching around retention, coaching around diversity, inclusion training. So that will be for our enterprise training and development department out of Minnesota Management and Budget. We'll be doing that starting actually this month is the pilot, and we'll roll that out to all the different agencies. So that'll help as well. The other thing is simply being out in community. One of the things that we do very well recently is getting our leaders out in things like working with the African American Leadership Forum, Latino Lead, our Council on Asian American Leaders, our USBLN, which represents a lot of disability groups, to get them the faces out there, and they're actually meeting and talking to people. You'd be amazed how much retention is improved when the leaders of different cabinet level agencies are talking to people. They're doing the recruiting, bringing them on board. They're getting people excited, because when they come in, they then now have a relationship with you, and that can help on recruiting and retention as well. The other thing we're monitoring too is how people have been developed to move on and move up in different agencies. So one success story recently is Winnie Sullivan, who used to be the aide for our chief of staff in the governor's office. She's now been promoted up to be the deputy commissioner at the Office of Higher Education. So she's working with Commissioner Miller on that. That success story in and of itself helps people understand, like, man, I can work at state government, I can be here for a while, because before that, Winnie worked for an admin department and did a lot of great things, and now she's been promoted to a higher level position. Those kind of things will help improve retention. So relationships with top level leaders, promotion opportunities, and then also too, when people come in and on board the process, they're not just put in a desk, they're actually building a relationship with top leaders through the agency as well.
Well, Jamie, this is really, you've been doing some great work and really made some huge changes. And certainly in Minnesota, where we've had some traumas over the last couple of years related to racial tensions, and so I really would like to have you come back with others to really talk about how do you deal with some of the bigger societal issues that really impact hiring and retention within not only state government, but all parts of Minnesota. But certainly thank you for the work that you're doing at the state, making progress. Those numbers are pretty impressive, and certainly I'll partner with you to do whatever I can to keep us moving in the right direction.
Well, thank you very much, Ed. I'd love to come back.
All right. And I'll be back with a closing comment right after this message. To me, there are 5 things that make for a good job. 1, you do work that is meaningful. It makes a difference in the world. 2, you need to use your education, experience, and imagination to solve some of the issues that you face in your work. 3, you learn something new every day. 4, you work with interesting and dedicated people. And 5, you are able to have some fun while doing your work. For a business or agency, I also believe there are 5 things that'll make you successful. 1, you make a positive difference in the lives of the people you serve. 2, you are flexible in responding to the needs of the people you serve. 3, you allow employees to work to their potential. 4, you have employees with high morale. And 5, you focus on both short-term and long-term goals. Now, people of color and American Indians, people with disabilities, LGBT, and veterans should look into working for the state government because employment there provides all of those components of a great job. It's a great place to use your skills to do meaningful work with lots of great colleagues and have some fun at the same time. And the state needs to increase its efforts to hire people of color and American Indians, people with disabilities, LGBT, and veterans, because they will help the state best meet the expectations of all citizens of Minnesota to live, work, and play in a state that allows them to thrive and prosper both now and into the future. Increasing the diversity of the workforce of state government is a win-win-win. A win for employees, a win for state government, and a win for Minnesota. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. I hope you can join us again next time on A Public Health Journal.